There comes a point where you question, what is it about me that appeals to controlling people? Is there a particular quality they intentionally seek out in me? Is there something that I'm not aware of that makes me appealing to these type of people? Notice how these two questions redirect the focus on what you can do. Let's be realistic here. Blame is disempowering, and there comes a point in our journey where we realize the only way to freedom is by taking self-responsibility. So I'm just going to get straight to the point in this video because I'm getting tired of constantly focusing on them and negating from the most important aspect, which is, what part do we play in these relationships? What makes us so appealing to narcissists? Why do certain people always attract these relationships? And then we see other people in loving, cooperative, mutually reciprocal relationships. Human psychology and figuring out why people do what they do is really complex. But making it our goal to understand ourselves better is the most valuable investment of our time. In this video, I'm going to give you the number one thing that narcissists, psychopaths, or any intentionally manipulative person finds most appealing about you. And I'll break it down and articulate it in a way that you can truly understand why this is essential for you to be aware of and why you must continue to work on this if you want to break the cycle of repeatedly finding yourself in controlling relationships. If this stage of healing is now relevant for you, meaning you've worked through all the other necessary stages of processing your anger, your pain, your grief, then this final stretch is the most challenging, and that involves us looking at ourselves in the mirror and recognizing how some of the ways we've been conditioned to behave is not only disempowering, but actually makes us more appealing to pathologically controlling and malevolent personalities. So I'll give you some specific examples that you may recognize in yourself and others. And towards the end of the video, I want to offer you some practical exercises that you could implement on your path of self-empowerment. There are certain people you may recognize who intentionally seek out others whom they can control and exploit for their own gain. And they'll stoop to the lowest points imaginable with little remorse and no compassion. They will do and say whatever it takes to maintain their sense of power and superiority over others, regardless if their behavior is harmful, abusive, or even criminal. These type of people will intentionally seek out your vulnerabilities. They lure you into divulging your most intimate details. They will convince you they are the ones who truly understand you and will secretly take notes on what you are afraid of, what's hurt you in the past, how you were devastated by some traumatic event. They pay particular attention to the details of your heartaches, your grief, or any tragedy you experienced. And when you say that you're lonely, it's like music to their ears. Exposing your vulnerabilities will allow them to know precisely how to get you where it hurts. And it's not a matter of if, but when things don't go their way. Your list of vulnerabilities will be a weapon they'll use against you. If you're not aware of what makes you vulnerable, and if you indiscriminately share sensitive matter with inappropriate people, and in the context of this video, it's regarding narcissists, they will use your vulnerabilities to exploit you. And I'm not just referring to emotional vulnerabilities like loneliness or feeling misunderstood or like you don't belong. They could also be issues you physically feel vulnerable about. Your weight, something that you keep private like a chronic health concern, and even other things like perhaps you feeling not good about yourself because you didn't finish high school, or you feeling like a disappointment to your family for whatever reason, or you feeling ashamed because you missed an important work promotion, or that your income isn't as high as you'd like it to be. Basically, anything you feel guilty, ashamed, disappointed with, afraid, or terrified of, it's like gold to a pathological narcissist or psychopath. They intentionally seek out all the areas that you don't feel good about because these are the areas you will knowingly or unknowingly seek approval for. It's not necessarily true that they target only people who don't feel good about themselves. And I really want to clarify this point. They also target very intelligent, attractive, and successful people. They want to associate with the most brilliant, amazing people because that is a reflection of them. However, the way they control someone who appears to be absolutely brilliant is that they search for your weakest point. They look for specific areas in which you have the lowest self-worth. Your education, credentials, the way you look, the way you talk, whatever area of weakness that they can bring up to chop you back down to size and keep you under their control. They will nitpick, find fault, compare you to others, and be hypercritical just to test you for what is your most sensitive area. Where is the chink in your armor? Part of this also includes smothering you with excessive compliments, insincere praise, and flattery just to win your favor. And if we don't discern whether their words are truly genuine, we often don't realize that all those lovely compliments are just an illusion, and we are just being tested for our areas of sensitivity and vulnerability. These people are really skilled at hiding their ulterior motives behind that use of persistent and suffocating flattery. And what they analyze and what gives us away is when they're able to observe a significant boost to our self-confidence. That's a direct result of their flattery. So please don't take my words out of context. And I trust that if you've been in one of these relationships, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is not about giving someone genuine compliments or being really appreciative or admiring someone. This is an intentional manipulation of someone's sense of self-worth. We all have areas that we could improve on, or areas of weakness or perceived vulnerability. And it feels normal to want to receive approval and support from our loved ones when we're going through a time that is challenging for us. However, in toxic relationships with pathologically controlling people, this whole aspect becomes extremely twisted and distorted. And you may have noticed this point of differentiation in your personal experience is when looking back, you notice that they conditioned us to become dependent on their approval, as opposed to encouraging us to learn to approve of ourselves. They will intentionally plant seeds of doubt so you question your own intuition and your own preferences and constantly turn to them for approval and validation. Their approval needs to be earned. And even if you are recognized as extremely talented and gifted in a particular area that you naturally excel in, you can rest assured that your efforts, despite meeting the whole world's approval and validation, will never be quite up to scratch and will never meet the impossible expectations of a manipulator who has a pathological need to control you. Capitalizing on your vulnerabilities is fair game to people who seek to control you by sabotaging your sense of self-worth. And if you're not aware of how they distort the meaning of vulnerability, you will end up being conditioned to actually believe that vulnerability is a weakness and to be avoided in relationships. When the reality is, the ability to be vulnerable creates more intimacy between people who love and respect each other. So please hear me when I say this. Vulnerability is only perceived as weakness in a toxic relationship with a person who intentionally seeks to control you. In healthy relationships, however, vulnerability is a sign of strength, maturity, and courage, and it's an essential aspect for all loving relationships where we're able to feel close and connected to another person. So if we don't examine this within our experience, we walk away from these relationships assuming that vulnerability is bad, we have a fear of intimacy, and we put up walls for life. And this disables us from ever feeling close and loved within relationships again. People who have this psychopathology intentionally want to control all your future relationships, so you never trust or feel intimacy in relationships because of this unexamined distortion that was perpetuated in one dysfunctional relationship. And they are very observant of knowing exactly how to make you feel spectacular, special, amazing, so you become addicted to receiving their approval in the first place. It's no different biochemically than being addicted to an illegal substance. In these relationships with such extreme hot and cold behavior, the perfect approval addict is created. Which brings to mind this brilliant quote by psychologist Harriet Baker. If you are an approval addict, your behavior is as easy to control as that of any other junkie. All a manipulator needs to do is a simple 2-step process. Give you what you crave, and then threaten to take it away. So do you see what is most appealing about you to a narcissist? It's the areas that you feel the lowest self-worth in. But even further beyond that, it's your approval-seeking behavior. We cannot heal from this unless we are willing to face the truth about our behavior as well. We can't be in denial about what it is that we are doing or aren't doing that makes us extra appealing to narcissists. And I'll mention some specific examples of approval-seeking behavior so you can notice if these are areas that you could work on to enhance your self-esteem. A lot of us still have a need for parental approval that we don't notice how much influences our lives as adults, especially if you've grown up in a dysfunctional narcissistic household where approval had to be earned. And this particular aspect took me years to get a grip on. I simply could not see that I was still reacting like a child, even though I was an adult. I couldn't recognize how my approval-seeking behaviors actually enabled this control to continue. So I was frazzled and frustrated and angry. And if this resonates for you, please notice whether you've transferred your need for parental approval onto authority figures, gurus, religious leaders. If we've had a hypercritical parent, we will either want to please them or we will rebel against them. Either reaction is not an authentic choice. They still control both those behaviors. When you desperately want someone to like you, when you value their validation, when you yearn for their understanding, basically you behave like your life can't go on unless you have their approval. Your display of approval-seeking behaviors basically says to them, I have the power over you, so I'm not going to give you the approval you desperately need from me. Until you do this or that for me, I'm the one who has the power to validate whether you are a kind, loving, successful person, son, daughter, wife, or husband. And the most dangerous part becomes when we surrender our power to allow them to dictate how we choose to see ourselves. And I think you can probably see how this entire topic can also relate to organizations, institutions. So it's not just an aspect in interpersonal relationships. When you've been brought up in an environment where you've been conditioned to seek external approval and mistrust your own inner compass, it impacts all areas of your life. And this is important to grasp when we're healing from narcissistic abuse, but I think it's something that most people could benefit from looking into. I mean, think about the manipulation in the media, in advertising. It all feeds off our sense of not feeling good enough. And we all seek validation and approval in one area or another. It's actually a normal survival mechanism that's deeply wired in us as humans, that need to belong to a group. And if we feel rejected, it actually activates a primal fear. So we need to become conscious of when a manipulator is triggering that primal fear in order to try and control us. I mean, that's why shaming, shunning, and ostracizing works. And excluding you from the group is a very effective method to get you back in line. When we've been rejected by the narcissist in one way or another, and we beg for their approval or we feel upset that they didn't validate us, this means that their exclusionary tactics have been successful So our approval-seeking behaviors make us appealing to intentional manipulators. And this may not necessarily relate to just narcissistic relationships or your psychopathic boss. Bottom line is, when we lack self-worth, we're more easily swayed by either their excessive compliments or their withholding of approval. Do you realize how much of our anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive behaviors is linked to us wanting approval? We suffer sleepless nights wondering if our boss likes us, whether the comment we made on Facebook was stupid, if our pathologically controlling mother will finally be satisfied with our effort and let us know that we are a good son or daughter. I mean, fill in the blanks for whatever's going on for you. When you look back and notice how these people have trained you to hold your breath awaiting their approval. We walk on eggshells when we want other people's approval. We trade in our authenticity for approval. And we live a life of internal conflict between what we wish we could express, but fear and hold back because someone won't give us approval. We basically make ourselves dependent on the reaction of others. When we don't know who we are, or we don't trust our inner guidance, we seek approval and validation from someone else who we make our guru. And the narcissist will step into that role voluntarily. They want you to remain in low self-worth, feeling helpless, indecisive, uncertain about what you want, who you are, and what you're deserving of. They'll intentionally keep you in the lowest state of self-worth if you allow it. If you're tired of abusive, controlling relationships, you've got to look at all the ways in which you still want their approval. All the ways in which you don't feel good about yourself. You need to give yourself validation, recognition, and approval. Working on your self-esteem, learning to value yourself is the most powerful repellent against people who seek to control you. Approval-seeking behavior is basically an indicator of low self-worth. And here are some other examples of approval-seeking behavior. Feeling stressed, insulted, or worried when someone disagrees with you. If you need people to agree with you on everything all the time, then you're addicted to seeking approval. If you can't agree to disagree, or realize that perhaps you are right and the other person is right too, or if you get angry because someone else holds a different opinion, then that just reveals more about what you value. Another thing is saying yes when you mean no, or being highly agreeable when we pretend to agree with something because we want others to like us. Or another way of languaging it is when we don't want to cause waves. And that's a softer, nicer way of saying, I want other people's approval. And I heard a psychologist years ago, and this really stayed with me. She said, an internal no nullifies an external yes. Another approval-seeking behavior is doing something that you don't want to do because you're afraid of saying no. When we're scared to say no, we're likely to feel resentful and blame the other person. This is disempowering because the truth of the matter is they didn't make us do anything. We just couldn't say no, and so we went along with it. So let's get really clear on that. Another one is constantly apologizing and constantly asking for permission. And this is a really interesting one. Rebelling to draw attention to yourself. Being highly disagreeable, being nitpicky just to stand out. And this is the illusion of having a strong sense of self-worth, but beneath the surface, this is a behavior of someone who desperately wants attention and approval in any which way possible. So causing arguments or controversy or gossiping can be approval-seeking behavior. If you're being a nonconformist, it needs to be authentic, not just a masquerade to gain the spotlight. Nobody's going to respect you for your opposing position if you're shoving it in their face, demanding they validate your difference of opinion. That is still approval-seeking behavior. Online, you'll notice a certain type of person always being disagreeable, always having a problem with your words, your hairstyle, your choice for lunch. One person who's intentionally fault-finding and very obviously belligerent just to be different, to gain attention. Another aspect of this is being hypersensitive to criticism and rejection, whether that's real or perceived. Another aspect is being quick to pacify misunderstandings, being the peacemaker, or softening your stance on things to appease the other person. So let me ask you, what has your approval-seeking behavior cost you? We need to familiarize ourselves with our own approval-seeking behaviors, because if we don't, we might as well be wearing a neon sign on our forehead that says, "Please tell me who I am." You need to learn to approve of yourself, your choices, your preferences. You're an adult and no longer a child. You need to trust yourself to make decisions for yourself, some of which may be very difficult, and some decisions will disappoint others, particularly the narcissist. But you need to accept that you can't make the whole world love you or agree with you, and that's okay. Pathological narcissists will continue to dangle the carrot of their approval or disapproval if you don't wake up to this typical strategy they utilize to have you under their control. You'll forever feel not good enough, and you'll remain a slave to seeking their approval. They will not like you making decisions for yourself. They will be highly critical of any attempt toward you gaining more self-confidence or freedom. It takes so much strength to withstand a narcissist's barrage when you embark on the path of self-empowerment. They don't want you to be an individual who thinks for themselves, who stands on their own 2 feet, who's consistent and absolutely certain of who they are and what they want. They want to chip away at your certainty. They attempt to erode your confidence with their persistent negativity, doubt, and skepticism. If you're able to withstand narcissistic abuse and come out on the other side, you truly must be a hero. These situations are a test of our will, our confidence in ourselves, so I encourage you to reframe these torturous relationships and transform these experiences into something positive for yourself. I encourage you to take this perspective. Narcissistic relationships will sharpen your intuition. You will develop very firm boundaries. You'll have to willingly take back your power, and they will test you again and again. Your low self-worth and approval-seeking behavior makes you very appealing to these type of people. So the cure is to develop a healthy sense of self-esteem, to no longer seek the approval of others, and to discern the people whose feedback you actually respect and value. Working on yourself, loving who you are, learning to trust yourself, and making a daily effort to take care of your physical and emotional health are the greatest investments you'll ever make. The healthier, happier, and stronger you are, the more you're likely to attract people who reflect that back to you. When you truly love yourself, you will never allow anyone to abuse you, control you, or treat you like a disposable item. Educating ourselves and taking self-responsibility are essential, so we are no longer appealing to these parasitic perpetrators of abuse. Some people will never see your value, and some people will intentionally make it their mission so you never know your own value. So identify the red flags in them and in yourself, because becoming self-aware is essential to our freedom from being enslaved to approval. What you are aware of, you are in control of. However, what you're not aware of is in control of you. And here are some helpful tips regarding this particular aspect. Is your need for someone's approval a demand or a preference? Listen to your inner dialogue and notice if you tell yourself, "I must get their approval." And perhaps soften it to, "I'd prefer to have their approval." Notice if you believe that someone's disapproval means that you are a bad or unworthy person. So notice your own interpretations when you don't get someone's approval. A narcissist will imply this either directly or indirectly, that you're bad, or that you should feel ashamed, or that you're a terrible parent. This is the way that they have manipulated us to believe that our value is based on theirs and other people's approval. Their fragile ego is dependent on how others perceive them, so they themselves are approval addicts. And this is why they need to keep you in line, because your behavior is a reflection on them. So they need to control you, otherwise they might be perceived in an unappealing way to the public, to their community, in their church. And here's another really empowering concept that really helped me disengage from that control, from that enmeshment with toxic manipulators. And that's the concept of intentional disappointment. If a controlling and manipulative person, for example, attacks you and gives you some very strong criticism and checks to see if you react to their disapproval by saying something like, if you don't come to that family gathering, then you are a terrible son or daughter. Intentionally disappointing them means having the ability to calmly respond, perhaps I am a terrible son or daughter, and ending it at that. When you're able to take your power back by not doing what they want you to do, which is reacting in a defensive, hurtful way, it stops that toxic enmeshment, and it basically communicates to them that what they think of you does not matter. Their approval or disapproval will not sway you from your decision. And you want to know how you can tell that you've been successful at taking your power back from someone who wants to control you by use of their approval or disapproval is when they have a massive tantrum. And you'll notice this repetitive pattern with a narcissist. If they don't get their way, if they can't control you, so when their bullying, their attacks, their guilt trips escalate, it basically means that you are being successful and they are losing their grip over you. If you don't need their approval and all their methods are no longer causing a reaction in you, they will eventually have to find another source of supply who's not aware of these devious and very clever ways. If you don't recognize your approval-seeking behaviors, you'll forever feel controlled, stifled, and like you don't have a life of your own. You don't need to sacrifice your integrity, peace of mind, self-worth for the fickle approval of others.